Now, first, let me ask you to join me in welcoming Michael Neuenschwander. He is a financial professional with Outlook Wealth Advisors. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Good to be here.
Yeah, we're going to have a great conversation. I'm looking forward to it because we're going to talk about so many important financial matters for people that have questions right now. But let's first, I want to just kind of get your thoughts. We're seeing things like this. So this is an app to help people do some investing. And I wanted to see, what were your thoughts on it?
What makes Griffin a little bit unique is their take on it is to invest in where you're spending money. So, for example, if you go to Starbucks or you go to Walmart, et cetera, any publicly traded company, they'll basically look at where you're spending your money. And then at the end of the week, they'll basically contribute or they'll take from your bank account and buy those stock. And so you can set limits, whether you want it to be $5 a week, $25 a week, or up. And so, in essence, the concept is actually pretty good because for many people, investing in something they're familiar with or investing in where they're putting money is an easy way or a comfortable way to get started.
Okay, interesting. Well, there's always kind of pros and cons. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so while it's easy and people can be comfortable with what they're investing in, the other side of the fence is it tends to lead to potentially some concentration, meaning depending on the average consumer, depending on where you're spending your money, if you use the S&P 500, for example, there's 500 other companies that drive the market, and just because you're not spending your money at that one place doesn't mean it's not a good investment. And so, if you did it over time, do you end up concentrating all your investments in just a handful of stock? And it does use individual stock, which compared to an overall index can be a little bit more risky, a little more volatile there.
Okay.
And last, if we break down kind of the cost, the fee, because obviously they don't operate for free here as well. But it looks like they charge about a $5 monthly fee, which isn't too bad. But if you're only investing $100 a month, 5% is actually a very expensive way to invest. So you've got to take all that into account. And then their very last thing, which is an issue kind of with lots of apps, is you're giving them permission to see where you're spending your money. So your credit card access, your bank account access. So it's really a question of, while it's a good concept and maybe a good tool for some people, how much additional information do you want to give to another company out there as well?
Interesting. Well, Tracy, that was a great question. I'm so glad you asked, and I really appreciate you taking the time, Michael, to look into that, because I know people are seeing just lots of new financial instruments like this, and I think as a consumer, you're kind of left wondering, what is this? Is this something I want to do? Is it not?
Yeah.
So that was a great way to kind of break it down. I appreciate that. Well, fall is a really great time to kind of take a look at your finances. We're going into the holidays, and right around the corner is going to be tax season. Of course, right now there's a spotlight on healthcare costs and all of that. So let's first talk a little bit about, now that we're in this season, what are some things that we should be doing to kind of take that reassessment where, maybe 3/4 of the year has gone by?
Where did it go, right?
Yeah, what should we be doing this time of year?
So one of the big reminders, which this time of year is good for, is, we all usually set, beginning of the year goals, our New Year's resolutions, but in many cases, we never revisit them. And so here, as we're now kind of in the fall, it's a good time to kind of look back and say, well, of what you had planned or what your goals were for 2025, are you on track? Because there's still a few months where you can make up some ground, or even if you're behind or says, well, I didn't really, stay on track for that goal, then does that become the reset, the new goal for 26? But let's start working on it now, not just waiting, till 2026 to start it. The other thing, of course, is we touch on various things, whether it's taxes, whether it's saving money to your retirement plan. There are a few things that definitely have December 31st cutoffs. And so making sure that you're staying on top of some of those as well is a critical, important time, this time of year, to make sure you're doing everything you can to benefit yourself in 25 and ideally laying the good groundwork for 2026.
Okay, you just caught my attention totally. So what should we be doing to make sure that we are using everything we can to benefit as we go into tax season?
Yeah, so a few things, whether it's tax related, a big one is obviously funding 401k retirement accounts. So those are typically funded directly from your paycheck, and so you don't have the ability to extend that beyond December 31st. And under the new tax law, which you can touch on more, they did bump the 401k amount that you can contribute. And if you're over age 50, you get the catch-up provision, as well. So over age 50, they can do another $7,500 in. And there's also a little special thing like the super catch-up, which applies for just people 60 to 63 that allow you to put even more in. But all of those contributions do have to be done before the end of the year. On the other side of the fence, things around charity contributions, those also have to be done before the end of the year. So as we look at some of the things, we can touch on a little bit about what this tax law changed. There are some additional opportunities people may want to consider here before year end, or especially planning into 2026, as well.
Before we get into some of those changes, I want to go back to talk about charitable contributions, because there were changes in recent years about like you didn't have to do you could still do a standard deduction and then take 300 or something like that for a charitable. What is it currently?
Sure.
And do you have to itemize?
So under the new big beautiful bill here from July, the biggest thing around charitable contributions really actually applies to next year, where it says beginning in 2026, a couple or a couple can take $2,000 and take that as part of their deduction while they're still taking the standard deduction as well. So you don't have to itemize. So for everybody, it says next year, start keeping those receipts, of what you give away. And again, for a single, it'll be $1,000, as well. A couple of the other big things that come into play, though, with some of these changes in the law having to do with the increased standard deductions, some things around Social Security we can touch on. But as part of that, people should reevaluate, should they still be taking the standard deduction, or for some people, itemizing comes back into the fold as an option. And in that case, strategies such as stacking your deductions, meaning maybe you'd hold back, this year and you double up next year. Or if you already gave a lot this year, do you try to front load the end of the year in order to get above that standard deduction where you actually get some tax benefit, for doing some of those things. So there's many of those nuances where if you're unsure of, it's kind of talk to your tax professional, talk to your financial advisor, because there's definitely some opportunity there before the end of the year.
Yeah, and are there some other changes that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, so a lot of the other changes had to do with also, we mentioned sort of the, what was called the Social Security, deduction. And so prior to the election, there was a lot of talk of can they make Social Security tax-free? The simple answer is no. They didn't have the votes to really do it that way, but what they did instead, they implemented an extra $6,000 deduction for people over 65. However, that deduction is also based on your income. So depending on somebody's work income, or if they're retired, how much they're withdrawing from retirement accounts or have a pension, you may not get that full deduction. But it is one of those things, again, it's on top of the standard deduction. So for many people, if we keep some of this tax law stuff pretty simple, for many people, we can look and say your tax bill for 2025 will probably be lower than it was for 24. And then 26, because of the charitable things and some increases for inflation when they adjust the brackets, 2026, potentially the taxes may be even a little bit lower.
Wow. Okay. Well, that would be nice to get that little break. Okay. And then as we're moving into the holiday season, and I think especially after yet another hard financial year, economic year for a lot of people, what would be some of your advice to help people prepare and navigate the holiday season, especially if they're starting to feel some of the financial stress?
Yeah. So one of the big things, and this kind of applies across whether it's holiday season or not, but I know we touched on it before, is the importance of having that emergency fund. It says ideally the goal is 6 months of expenses, but the reason we always start with that is it also says all the studies show that as people go into holiday purchases, more than half the people are going to end up racking up those holiday gifts simply on a credit card. And if you don't have the plan for how that's going to get paid off, or you don't have the emergency fund to at least help cover it on the back end when that bill comes due, it ends up just being a adding to the total credit card balance, which at today's rates, even though we may say they're coming down a little bit, credit card interest is still very expensive.
Yeah.
So first and foremost is let's have an emergency fund, but then second, look and say, really budget out what makes sense, to spend for Christmas and gifts coming up. Two ways you can approach is either start with the big picture and say, well, here's what I can afford to spend. Then make your list, who's been naughty, who's been nice, but make the list of the people you got to get gifts for, and then budget out and say, okay, maybe mom and wife are a little bigger priority. Okay, uncle, maybe not as much, as an example, but you can budget out that way. Or the opposite, start with the list of the people you're going to get gifts for, begin to put a budget for each one of them, and ideally, if you add that up as an affordable number, or maybe you need to make some adjustments, but then the one extra tool to go with it is either begin to set that money aside now, and if you're shopping online, stick to your budget. If you're shopping in the store, another strategy is just take cash. Pay with cash, and then that way, when the cash is gone, that's the budget.
Yeah. I think that's a great way. Those are great tips to help people kind of stay on track. Well, I really want to utilize, I know what's really your level of expertise while you're here. And let's talk a little bit about people and investing in their retirement and all of that. Because again, this is a good time of year to kind of take a look at how you're doing. Do you need to make any readjustments? Maybe you've had different things in your life happen. And I know, like with the same question people often have with debt, should I be paying down debt or putting aside money for an emergency? Same thing probably with, how much should I be putting towards investing or retirement? What if I'm worried I might lose my job? Okay, so now we've got all these questions we've got to answer. Walk us through what should we be kind of looking at right now, and how can we make sure that we're kind of even keel?
Yeah, so if we sort of address that one question, we get quite a bit of like, well, should I pay down debt or should I be saving? Obviously, we can joke and say the ideal answer is both, but we know in the real world that doesn't always work. And so if we simply look and say right now, even though rates are coming down, we can say the average credit card rate is still upwards of 20%. And even though we say, the market, the investment side has had a pretty good 3-year run, and it says the long-term return on the investments, if we're just using the S&P 500 as that benchmark, is around 12%. So if we do some basic math, you could say paying interest at 20+%, even if your investments are growing at 10 or 12, is hard to overcome that debt. So high interest credit cards definitely focus on paying things off first before you worry about the investment side. The caveat being we still want that emergency fund in there. But beyond that, when we look and say things, should I try to go ahead and pay off my mortgage early? Well, if you're one of the fortunate ones where you still have a mortgage that's at 2, 3, 4%, generally the financial answer would be don't focus on paying it off early. Put your money to work. So it really does depend on everybody's personal facts and circumstance of what kind of debt do they have, what interest is it at, et cetera. Beyond that, though, as we look at here into the sort of the fall, heading towards the end of the year, we are coming off basically what is looking to be another good year from the investment side, where 23, 24, and now 25 appear to all be up double digits. Sometimes that leads to people being a little complacent, though, meaning, well, we expect the market's always going to be up close to 20%. And
wouldn't that be nice?
And that's not historically accurate. So it's a good time to revisit risk. Because with as much as the market's gone up, it's also been focused in just a few industries. Meaning, obviously, AI is the big trend, and so that's been a great place to invest the last few years. But AI has also come to sort of dominate, the S&P 500, the financial landscape. So many people may be taking more risk than they actually know. And so it's a good time to reevaluate not just what you're invested in, but what's the potential downside if the market does hit a little bit of a hiccup or the economy continues to slow down? Because ultimately, if you're 20 or 30, you got time on your side, you can take the risk. But for those that are closer to 60, 65, within a few years of retirement, you probably shouldn't be taking that same kind of risk that you were taking 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the bottom line answer to a lot of these questions is quite often talk with your financial professional, your tax professional. So let me ask you, how does someone go about finding a good financial professional? We know, unfortunately, there are some bad guys out there. So how do you pick a good one?
Yeah, so there's a few sort of, I would call them universally recognized credentials that are worthwhile. Obviously on the tax side, we all know CPA, enrolled agent is another one on the tax side. In the financial industry, probably the most recognizable one is what's called a CFP, or Certified Financial Planner. It just means that they have some education and some experience beyond just the investments, but dealing with things like debt, or should I do this or not do this, with some on taxes. And so that's one way, is to look for that. But beyond that, you can also look for experience. How long has somebody been in the business? It's a surprising fact that prior to 2022, half the financial advisors in the business had not actually been through a bad market. So experience in this case does matter.
Yes.
Also, simply looking and saying, while that word fiduciary is thrown around all the time, fiduciary, again, quite simply put, means that advisor, that firm, is going to do the best job that they can for you, above their own interests, not influenced by outside scenarios. But it also says you, as the consumer, as the investor, need to do a little homework, meaning just because a firm is a fiduciary, if they invest in a way that you don't agree with or you're not comfortable with, they're not going to change their philosophy. It's up to you to also look and do a little interviewing and saying, let me talk to a couple of firms to see who's going to be the best fit for you and your goals and what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. Yeah, that was some great advice for not only, making sure they're credentialed, but also just kind of vetting them and make sure that they've got the experience to be making good decisions. Let's talk a little bit about healthcare. Boy, what a juggernaut these days.
Yes.
We're seeing rising premiums, and we're hearing that we can expect premiums to continue to rise. Talk to me a little bit about, what we need to be thinking about and considering when we're choosing plans. And so often it comes, through your employer, but let's just kind of walk through the process of what we need to be thinking about and how we can handle some of these rising costs.
Yeah. So, the rough numbers of what we're seeing or what's being projected is that general health care, even through your employer, is probably going up 6 to 7%. Medicare just had its increase, and it was announced at 11+%. So as we look at that, it's definitely a challenge. So many employers, though, have adopted where they actually have what they would call a menu of health care, meaning that your employer may actually offer 3 or 4 health care plans that you can then choose what fits best for you or your family. So some may involve what's called a health savings account, which is typically a high deductible plan, but either your employer puts in some or you can put in money where you get a tax break when it goes in, but it's also tax-free when it comes out if it's used for health care. There's also flexible spending accounts, which, again, many times the employers may help set up to help offset that high deductible. That's one of those other things when we talk about things that expire at the end of the year, though. Health savings accounts are one of those which sort of use it or lose it. So for many people, it's another thing to add to the list for the end of the year, that if you've got money in your health savings account or your flexible spending account, and you're not using it, maybe it's time to get a little procedure, something done before the end of the year, get that checkup if you need to. But ultimately, the way it's kind of be adjusted, or how us as consumers have to adjust to it, there is going to potentially be some change in deductibles. They may rise, change in copay. But for most of you, where you're getting your plan through your employer, the best thing you can do is, now that we are in open enrollment period right now, is evaluate the various plans available. In many cases, simply sitting on the old plan because that's what you've been used to or comfortable, oftentimes may lead to a bigger increase than let's take a fresh look and evaluate what your options really are.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about HSAs, because from what I understand, not only are they great to help you pay for medical costs, but they're really also a great way to save because you don't have to use it and they're invested.
Correct. So an HSA, health savings account, it has to be paired with a high deductible plan. So
Right.
make sure that's clear. But in that case, it's one of the very few, or almost the only thing, that allows you to put money in and get a tax deduction when it goes in, and if it's used for medical, it's tax-free coming out. But as you mentioned, they did relax the rules recently where it said if you put money in and you didn't end up using it for health care, after 65, so more in retirement age, you can still take that money out and use it for other things. You don't necessarily get the full tax-free benefit, but in essence, it works like another retirement savings account. You got the tax break going in and you simply pay the taxes coming out. So it's another way that people can be saving. It's another that has that end of the year, time frame for getting those contributions in, but it's a very good tool. And even after 65, it can help pay those insurance premiums. When we talked about Medicare going up, it can help pay for the Medicare supplement, the other health insurance premiums in retirement as well.
I'm just wondering this. I have no idea what the answer is, but if people are able to shop around and maybe find a health plan that's maybe a better deal for them other than their employers, because I think a lot of times people automatically take their employers, but can people shop around and is that a good idea?
They can, but right now, to be fair, it's a little up in the air because we're currently in the government shutdown, and so the question mark of the Affordable Care Act subsidies, that's one of the things they're actually arguing over in terms of trying to get the government back open. So historically, or at least the last several years, we could say what if you went and shopped on the marketplace, what you would pay would be based on your income. And so the lower the income, the bigger the subsidies, so the less you pay out of pocket. Right now, the amount of those subsidies is the sticking point. So it's personally, I believe that will get resolved, but do they end up maybe not being as generous as before, so forth. We kind of have to wait and see. But the other question mark is if you could be covered through work, you can still go to the Affordable Care Act, go to the marketplace. However, the subsidy is going to be greatly reduced because that is one of the questions they directly ask is, do you have a plan through work? So for most people, getting it through your employer is usually the best option.
Okay.
But between husband and wife, if you're married, you can definitely evaluate each other's plans because it may make sense for both spouses to be on one plan versus the other. Yeah.
Well, for anyone who's watching who might be close to retirement age, what kinds of things should they be looking at? Because that becomes, the having, invested and saved for retirement your whole life, but things kind of change up a little bit as you get closer to it. So what kinds of things should someone in that particular stage be looking at right now?
Yeah, so the rules definitely sort of change, if you will, as it comes to from saving during your career to then withdrawing when you're retired. And so one of the biggest things that we always kind of emphasize is making sure that somebody actually has a plan for income. You have these accounts, all the stuff you built up, so to speak, but what's the proper way to actually take it out? And it does involve a few factors. Obviously, one is the investment side, as we touched on earlier, to say if you're on the doorstep of retiring or on the doorstep of needing to start taking money out, you probably shouldn't be taking as much risk as you were 10 or 15 years ago. But specifically, what investments are there to either pay dividends, pay income, things you can rely on? And then going right with that, though, is also back to taxes, of course. There's two things in life that are certain. And it says, as you take money out of retirement accounts, unless it's a Roth IRA, it's going to show as taxable income. So the more income you want, great, but you got to pay the taxes to go with it. And so making sure that both the income, the investments from the risk and return, and also the taxes all work together is really where sort of the rubber meets the road, if you will, of having a plan for retirement. And that ideally for most people, you'd say that's really where the financial advisor, somebody can actually add value and be beneficial, not just simply saying what stock or what fund to buy. How do you make the pieces actually fit together?
Right.
And the last two things that are critically important, but thankfully you don't have to deal with them every day, is also making sure that the legal documents, your estate side is up to speed. So many people don't have the basic, will or powers of attorney, but it says if you were ever in a position you can't make those decisions for yourself, who do you appoint to kind of help make them? Yeah. And also simply saving money, avoiding probate, and say, how do you make sure things go where you want them to go if something were to happen to you? Right. And the final is good old back to health care. So you got Medicare, Medicare supplement. But the other unfortunate part, too, is that the numbers will bear out that as people retire and get older, upwards of 50% of people at some point need some kind of long-term care. And whether it's care at home, assisted living, nursing home, but generally speaking, Medicare and Medicare Supplement really don't pay much at all for that area.
Good to know. Well, we have covered a lot, and I can't thank you enough because we threw every topic at you over the last 25 minutes. So thank you so much, Michael Neuenschwander with Outlook Wealth Advisors. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your experience and wisdom with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.